Hi, today I'm going to talk about an experiment which aims to solve one of the longest standing problems in market research in India, researching rural India online. Thanks to COVID 19, urban India has seen a huge uptake in online research. Both clients and agencies are actually embracing it. However, rural India continues to paint a desolate picture, and for very good reasons. Because there are four fundamental challenges in doing rural research online. First, the definition itself is not clear. We simply identify anything as not urban as rural. Even if that definition becomes clear, there is no rural digital targeting available on any online panel or even on any of the online platforms. But even if you solve this particular problem, digital penetration itself remains on the lower side and skews highly towards males. And the last, but probably one of the biggest problems to solve, is the fact that the self-administered survey is a completely new format for a rural consumer who's used to a face-to-face survey. So how do we go about solving this challenge particularly? And how we start off with is really doing the definition of rural correct. We actually use census data and Google Map APIs to identify the lat-long location of a village. Now, having solved for reach, how do you make sure you are reaching the correct consumer or essentially reaching the rural consumer? Now, InmoBee Pulse has a technology of programmatic sampling using mobile app surveys, which actually helps us allow to do that. And the third, once you have reached the right consumer, how do you surface the right survey and collect good data from them? That actually comes in from a mobile-first UI UX survey design, which is easy to understand and administer and does not have the hangups of migration from a laptop or a desktop environment to adapting to a mobile environment. So as we move ahead, what you see here is essentially the targeting screen or essentially the InmoBee Pulse platform. Now, this platform is being used by us to target surveys across the globe. How this platform fundamentally would work is that once you're able to identify a certain larger geography, and in our case, we need to specifically target villages. So what we do is that we take census data and then take it into a Google Sheet and then use Google's API to actually pull out the lat long. So let's have a look at this video, which will actually help you understand this in a much, much better manner, right? So of course, when you take a look at country, we first select India because that is the geography of interest. And once we go ahead, that's where the location technology really starts to come into play. So instead of targeting by state, city, or by zip code, we use a lat long targeting. Now, to do a lat long targeting, we of course need lat longs, and that is going to come from this process which I just explained a little while ago of how you can simply take a census village and convert it into its lat longs. Now, once these lat longs are available, we download it into a CSV file, and this CSV file is then uploaded into the InmoBee Pulse platform. Now, what the platform will do is take each lat long as one single location, and then anyone who is around that lat long will be considered as a part of the survey sampling frame. And then they will be shown surveys, right? But what is that radius? That radius actually can be easily defined within the platform. In this case, you have taken 500 meters as an example. And once this is set, you're actually pretty much in place to be able to target rural consumers with surveys in a very, very deterministic manner. But the next point which you need to think about is, okay, you have understood who is a rural consumer and where does he or she live. But how do we actually go about targeting them? And that is when, as we move ahead, we'll see that thanks to the InmoBee programmatic network of 1,000 plus apps within India, which actually allow us to reach 280 million unique users, we are able to show these surveys in app. Now, if you look on the left side, you would see that, I've listed out gaming, social, entertainment, music, news. These are all the categories of apps we have and some of the most popular ones. On this right side, you will actually see the survey experience. The survey experience, if you see, is very simply designed. It's very light on text. It's very easy to administer and understand. And the whole idea was that someone who sees a survey like this for the first time shouldn't get intimidated. And that's the beauty of this, that it can be done in a very, very simple manner, asking very, very straightforward questions without overly complicating it in a very, very mobile first environment. Now, what is the impact of running surveys like this? Is that this whole exercise needs to be validated through the 3 R's of methodological validity. The first one being representativeness. Does the sample we collect reflect the rural digital universe? Second being reliability. Are the results reflective of the behavior of the rural digital universe? And third being replicability. Can the methodology produce similar results over and over again? So let's look at how we essentially, think of unlocking validity from a representativeness and reliability perspective. So the first thing which we wanted to do in terms of representativeness and reliability was we actually added one more question in the survey, apart from all the deterministic targeting we had using Google Maps API and InmobiPulse technology, that whether the place they live in has a Nagar Panchayat election or a Gram Panchayat election. And that was an additional filter which we used to be able to weed out anyone who's probably living in a urban area which could be closer to a rural area. The second set which we wanted to do was an external validation, where we picked up IAMAI data, which is of course based on the IRS, to understand behavior of consumers and their media consumption as a data set, right? To ensure replicability, we also ran the same survey in urban to validate against IAMAI data for urban India. What you're able to see when we sort of did this kind of thing is to see how well does the methodology hold on the 3 Rs, right? But before we move to that, it's important to establish the structural differences which come into play. The first thing is this is data from 2019, and of course there has been growth in digital since for 2021 over the last 2 years. Second, our sampling frames were different. We relied on smartphone-based sampling, which means that we are skewing to a more affluent rural consumer, whereas IAMAI does a face-to-face sampling amongst those who access internet in the last 1 month. On the sample selection itself, our selection did not cover 12 to 17 years of age for 2 reasons. Less than 14, we need parental consent to do surveys, which we could not do in this environment. And because we asked a question on elections, we did not want to ask it to anyone who was below 18 years of age, whereas IAMAI actually covered all of them. But when we actually looked at the results, we could very, very clearly see that, on age and gender, the data trends were very, very aligned. The only skew which we saw was an NCCS, which was understandable because of the fact that there was higher NCCS A and B and very little D and E, because we were reaching out to consumers through smartphones, and of course, they were more affluent. And an overall response rate to the surveys of about 2.1%. When you look at internet access behavior, it was very much in line. The only 2 deviations which we saw were higher laptop and use of Wi-Fi, which again comes down to affluence and ownership of smartphones. And when we looked at this third level of data, the actual usage behavior, right, we could also obviously see some more skews, but I think they were largely attributed to the growth of digital over 2019. Now, to ensure replicability, we also looked at this data from an urban context. And here too, we saw very, very similar behaviors coming in terms of NCCS, in terms of age, and in terms of gender. And urban had a higher response rate, almost 50% higher at 3.5%. In terms of internet access behavior also, we see very similar trends, higher laptop and Wi-Fi owing to a smartphone bias, both in terms of access as well as in terms of place of internet access. And when we look at the usage behavior in detail, here also we see essentially whatever excess numbers we were seeing for Pulse Urban in 2021 as compared to IAMAI, we could attribute it to the growth of digital over 2019. Right? So what are the learnings for us and what is the way forward for our industry from this? So if we move ahead, we see that the first thing which we wanted to establish was replicability. We were able to replicate this same thing in the urban context and still get very, very reliable results. When it comes to the second pillar of representativeness and reliability, we could actually get a representative sample, and the data was actually reflective of the digital universe, not only in terms of makeup, but also in terms of behavior. However, we of course saw NCCS and age group deviations, but those can easily be managed with quotas and weighting. And most importantly, the response rates were actually lower in rural as compared to urban, which was something we had hypothesized, but also came out very, very clearly. But it indicated a very strong need for a better UI UX for the survey experience. So if you look at what we learn as an industry from this entire space, is that rural research is actually possible not only with the Inmobi network, but anyone who allows you to do reverse sampling. You can use a combination of geotagging, the Gram Panchayat question, to actually identify people who are rural consumers. The next steps for us would be twofold. One is from the type of research protocols we could experiment with. So for example, we would love to experiment with incident studies, mini UNAs, concept testing, brand tracking, to see where brands stand. And the last bit probably is going to be the most important, is actually enhance the UI UX for the rural consumer. Thank you.
Thank you, Somdipta and Utsav, for that. I think a really good, different kind of research that you're doing, and no doubt that rural is actually the need of the hour. I mean, you hear about in terms of wanting to understand more the rural consumers, uh, but reaching the rural consumer is still a big lacuna, I would say. I have a question to the team. You did talk about the UX UI actually being a challenge, given
Yeah.
the literacy rate actually in rural, and you did touch upon that, and especially even with the female gender. What are your thoughts on in terms of how could you be addressing that part of it?
Sure. So I'll speak about the literacy part. What we also need to think about the fact that there are a lot of apps today which are built in India, built for rural India. Examples would be something like ShareChat, right? And even those apps are able to work with rural consumers using, emojis, using different kind of language, and so on and so forth. So what we've also learned is that that is a place where you want to draw inspiration from to tackle the literacy challenge, right? We need to make our surveys more visual, and and to be able to make it very easy for consumers to understand what we are seeking from them. Now, in terms of gender, that remains a structural challenge in Indian society, right? I mean, thanks to our patriarchal norms and the way women are denied access to digital services and so many other economic opportunities, now that's something we really cannot solve for per se. The only way we can tackle it is by really doing extra sample. Like, I mean, the most old school method of doing research, of doing extra sample to be able to meet quotas. So for the second one, I mean, I don't think we can solve for it right away, but the first one, definitely.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Sorry, I had a blip in my network, so that's why I lost actually. So sorry, I actually couldn't hear you when you completed, but I will go ahead with it because there was a blip in my network.
Sure.
I also wanted to check with you. You did talk about in terms of the kind of researches that you would be actually experimenting and doing with it. Are there any kind of research you think this will not really work out for?
So I think we'll need to probably rethink the entire way we do a concept test, in these times, because they're not used to probably reading a concept card and responding to it and responding to the kind of questions we usually ask. So I think those kind of researches which are more exploratory would be needed to how do I say this? Will need to be rethought of, right? The second thing which you also not thought of in a lot of detail is probably anything which deals with open ends, right? For example, even something as simple as a Tom's Pond question, right? Can we use audio, right? Can we use voice to text and then sort of start transcribing answers, because voice is a more natural medium for a lot of rural consumers. So those are the kind of things I think we will need to really think about. And I think the fundamental thing which we realize is that we have to really start rethinking research in itself from a self-administered point of view with rural consumers, and it's not going to look like how we do research today with urban consumers.
Absolutely. That's a good thought in terms of, exploring the voice, because that is something actually which is picking up, which we do see from the e-commerce, actually, how voice is playing a big role. How representative, is this digitally accessible rural consumer of the entire rural consumers that have in India?
Sure. So I think we made it very clear at the outset that this is only representative of the digital rural consumer and not the rural consumer, right? So my sense is that about 40% of rural consumer today has access to a smartphone, and this does not represent the other 60%. And I mean, I don't have any illusions about it, right? So of course, this definitely goes out to a more digitally active population. But the fact that we could validate it against the IMAI data, I think that's what we were most keen on sort of, establishing.
And one last question in terms of what language was it conducted? Was it in English, or were there a few languages that you translated it into?
All key Indian languages. I mean, there was no way we could have run this in English and got any reliable data.
Okay. Okay, thanks so much. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. And I